I'm a partner here in Chicago in the financial services industry. I audit financial services companies. A lot of the trading firms that Catherine was talking about, some of the digital asset companies that Rumi was talking about are clients of mine, or folks who are trading in those marketplaces, and as well as the asset managers and hedge funds. And I really appreciated Rumi's plug for Chicago. That was fantastic, and I agree with all those sentiments. I've traveled all over the U.S. and in the world as part of my job. And I always find that I really appreciate Chicago more every time I go abroad and make it back in time to really enjoy this place. So my topic today is on, John reached out for a topic, something good for graduates, recent graduates, interns, people in school that would help with their career. And one of the elements, kind of a through line throughout my career, was this concept of FOMO. I didn't have, and it's a very basic, natural kind of human behavior. It's instinctive. It's probably built on some scarcity thing, back in the caveman days, that it was part of your survival skills. But FOMO seems to be something that impacts the financial services industry, and I want to share a little bit of that history throughout my career and how FOMO, the fear of missing out, has impacted mine. I didn't know it was called FOMO until an episode of Broad City on Comedy Central was that was the title of the episode, and it was this idea of the ladies running around making sure that they made a party because they didn't want to miss out. And they had that big fear, and it's driving them to do things. So what I wanted to touch on is both the positive and the negative aspects of FOMO, and I hope somebody's tracking how many times I'm saying FOMO. I'm trying to get up to 313 minutes. But it's a catalyst. It's a thing that it can inspire creativity, and it can, at the same time, it can cloud people's judgment and can compromise values. And so it's something to be very aware of. And so I'm going to start with a little bit of the dark side, a little bit of the good side. So going back in my career then, really starting in 2002, probably one of the more significant events was the Bernie Madoff scandal. And there's an element of FOMO in there. There was people who were willing to allocate to a gentleman who had an unbelievable track record, literally unbelievable. All these, red flags were going off, all these warning signs. He was custodying his own, his assets were custodied at his affiliated qualified custodian. He was audited by a single man shop, a single person CPA shop out of a strip mall in Rye, New York. These things weren't adding up, but everybody looked at the man. They looked at the returns. He knew how to manipulate people through their FOMO and had this air of exclusivity to his product that everybody wanted in. They didn't care. They ignored all the warning signs, and to even a certain degree, the regulators ignored those warning signs. Obviously, we know the story of Madoff. It was a Ponzi scheme. It blew up, and akin to everything else that happens in history, there was a significant regulatory reaction to that. And that reaction then impacted my career. It impacted my clients. I had clients who had allocated to Madoff. I talked to them about that allocation, and they said, he was the smartest guy in the world, and these are very smart people who allocated to him, but they just could not believe that he could do something like this, and they ignored it, and they didn't want to miss out on those phenomenal returns. The regulatory reaction ended up in the SEC amending their custody rule. And this amendment to the custody rule in 2010 was absolutely pervasive throughout the asset management industry. People had to rearrange their relationships with their customers, investment advisors. I can't do that for you anymore because of this change in this rule, because of a reaction to Madoff. So that's one of the early incidences of FOMO that stuck out in my mind that it's a negative form of FOMO. The next that I wanted to share on is the subprime mortgage crisis. There was FOMO all over the place, and greed. And you saw it in so many different ways. And again, I was living it. I kind of had blinders on. I didn't realize what is this that's happening. So I'm in the market for a condo in 2004 in Chicago. That proved to be a very poor choice. But at the time, you heard people at work, your peers, your associates, people a couple years ahead of you with a little bit of cash were flipping condos on the side, making 6 figures in a 6-month period of time. Or they're buying stuff, rehabbing it. Every 12 flat in Chicago is being converted into, or 6 flat, 6 or 12 flats being converted into condos from apartments and being flipped, and people are making small fortunes, and you had this like, I need to get in on this. This is I got I got that FOMO. It's get it gets in get a little twinkle in your eye, and so that's all going on. The lenders are flush with cash and willing to lend on. They had the ninja loans, no income, no job, no assets. Here's a loan. Because guess what? Real estate only goes up, and that FOMO led to an irrational exuberance, which essentially is the definition of a bubble. That bubble was fed by financial institutions who wanted to, they needed more product to sell to the investors. They needed more mortgages to bundle up into their securitizations and sell them off. Then you had the financial institutions on the side creating derivatives to short those, credit default swaps. They were slicing and dicing the whole thing. You had rating agencies who had the FOMO, who were saying, if I don't give them the AAA rating, they're just going to take their business down the street, and that revenue is going to go to the other rating agency. So I might as well give them the AAA rating, even though it was all garbage. It proved to be in the end. And even the allocators, the people, the investors who were running around saying, I need return. I got to find return somewhere. I have investors and pensioners and whoever to answer to, and so they had a little touch of the FOMO as well. Obviously, as a result, we all know what happened. The subprime mortgage crisis blew up. Nice little piece of history. As you're coming into the financial services industry, I think that's a very important piece of the history for you to understand, because it formed, again, the regulatory reaction to that was Dodd-Frank, which we all live with today and is, again, pervasive. And it also changed the landscape of financial institutions and players. Bear Stearns is gone. Lehman Brothers is gone. Merrill folded into Bank of America, and on and on and on. And a lot of what you will find today, and you'll find this usually if you're either sitting in the compliance department or you're interacting with the compliance department, is a result of the behavior in that time, which, in my humble opinion, was driven by FOMO. Now, there's the good side of FOMO. So I had a foundation client that I audited, and I helped them on operational due diligence on some of their allocations to hedge funds. So they had kind of morphed from a standard stock bond portfolio and started doing allocations to alternatives. And we'd gone through that transition with them as their auditor and helping them. All of a sudden, very urgently, in the fall of 2007, we have to make an allocation to this hedge fund in New York. You need to get on a plane. You got to go visit them so we can check the boxes that we've done operational due diligence and all this stuff. And it seemed very rushed. And I was like, oh, we got a little FOMO in the air. And so we went and visited them and it's one of those hedge funds that you can read about in The Big Short, of a book by Michael Lewis, which if you haven't read, I suggest reading. And the investor relations people, the sales people at the hedge fund, they were they were pulling the right strings. They could sense the FOMO. They were stoking that fire, if you will. And they were playing at the idea that, oh, all your peers have allocated to us, so you should probably allocate to us. Oh, and there's a clock on this. This thing is going to blow up in about a year, and so you should allocate to us. And our client moved a little bit more hastily through a diligence process and an investment decision process. They probably fast-tracked it and cut 6 months off the process. Well, lo and behold, that bet was right. And the portfolio was saved in 2008 when the rest of the world is cratering. Portfolios are down 60-40%, and they essentially were flat for the year because of this one investment. I mean, there was a significant return from it. So that is evidence that FOMO has a positive impact and can be a good thing. So I'm not going to knock FOMO completely. Fast forward to today, and we'll talk a little bit about the digital asset space. So what Rumi's talked about earlier, and it blended in a little bit with what Catherine spoke about with the trading firms. And there's a sense of FOMO in the air again. But again, it drives ingenuity, it drives creativity, it drives people to work with a certain pace to be the first mover. And in the digital asset space in particular, There are a number of entrepreneurs. There are fantastic people who have lived very long careers in the traditional financial services space, who have been very successful, who have come out of places like the CME and have broadened their wings into this new technology. And again, there's a sense of FOMO in the air, and it's been very exciting. For the last 2 years, I've had the pleasure of kind of riding shotgun with my clients as they work through this, in particular the trading firms. And you could see it really unfold within them in 2017, the fourth quarter. In September, we're having audit planning meetings coming up to year end. And we kind of had to ask the question, we're like, you guys getting into this? It was cryptocurrencies was the moniker at the time. I like to call it digital assets now. You guys getting into the crypto space? And most of them, sometimes they even scoffed at it in some instances. Come after New Year's, January of 2018, got a couple phone calls. Oh, by the way, we jumped in. We got into it. And it was the FOMO that drove them. And again, it was both good and bad in some of these instances. It drove them to move quickly into a market. They saw the volatility. They saw the arbitrage opportunity. The exchanges were mispriced all over the place. They could capture that edge. It was very easy to onboard with these platforms. Essentially, they're just a website with no KYC, and they could just get up and running in seconds. And so they did it. But at the same time, they compromised some of their traditional protocols and risk controls, and almost to a certain degree just took this position of, you know what, I'm going to throw $1 million at it. If I lose it, that's it. That's all I can lose. So again, it drove people to act. It also at the same time drove people to compromise. And I remember sitting down with one of those principals of a trading firm who didn't jump in, and literally his question was, am I missing out on something? And you could just sense the FOMO just oozing out of him. But there are other topics. And so I guess I'll end with a note of advice then would be recognize FOMO for what it is. It can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing. Recognize it amongst your peers. Avoid the herd mentality. Do your own research. Make your own informed decisions about what you think is the right thing. And you'll get along just fine. I think the next, I don't know, if I had to guess where FOMO is at the moment, it's probably in the cannabis space. Digital assets kind of cooled off a little bit, but yeah, it's probably in cannabis. So if your friend's telling you about, oh, I just threw 10 grand at somebody who's, building a farm out in Michigan, just be wary of it. And I'll leave you with that, okay? Thank you.
We read dozens of news sources, so you only have to read one. John Lothian News.